Welcome. This month we're going to look at Jesus' resurrection through the eyes of the people who saw and experienced it. In session 1, we'll explore some characteristics of the risen Christ and what he brought to those whom he appeared to in those few days. First of all, the risen Christ brought restoration. In the time after Christ's death, we read about many broken people who had denied him, fled from him, betrayed him, grieved over him, and forgot his words. The risen Christ restored these relationships and reconciled his closest followers to himself. Their past failures were forgiven and forgotten. Some examples are Mary Magdalene. Jesus calls her by name, and she responds as she always had with Rabboni, meaning my dear teacher. His disciples, Christ refers to them as his brethren for the first time, and he appears to them multiple times. And Peter, whom Jesus reconciles to himself. Additionally, Christ not only restored, but he brought joy and belief. In every record of the resurrection, the witnesses are either told, "Do not be afraid," or "Peace be with you." The angels at the grave told the women, "Come, see," meaning come, see what God has done and how he has made a beginning out of what seemed to you to be an ending. Christ's ability to help various witnesses believe in the resurrection turned their fear to joy. These witnesses included Mary, who is so overcome with grief that it is difficult for her to see who is standing in front of her. The disciples who gathered in the locked room, Thomas who doubted, the disciples on the road to Emmaus whose eyes were opened, and Mary Magdalene and the other Mary who see Christ and are moved from mourning to worship. In the same way, when we open our eyes and see Christ in our lives, fearful situations have the potential to turn into joyous ones. Christ changes us. He refocuses our direction and calls us to action. This is the third characteristic of the risen Christ. After Christ restored his disciples and brought them to belief and joy, he gave them a commission, then promised to equip and support them. The good news of the resurrection isn't only to be observed, but to be acted out. The early church came to be led by the disciples' actions, not simply their amazement. These men couldn't go back to the way they lived before. They were, and we are, called to walk the path of discipleship, to work, to risk, to challenge, and to take up the cross. Following the risen Lord means living differently than the way we did before he changed us. Consider these examples. In John 20, verses 17 and 18, Christ tells Mary, "Go to my brethren and say to them." Mary came to the tomb to grieve, but Christ gave her a new commission to evangelize to his disciples. And in Matthew 28, verses 16 to 20, we can read, "Then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had appointed for them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, 'All authority has been given to me in heaven and earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age.'" When Christ resurrected and finally ascended, he left us with a great work to continue. He has called us to be an active part of his church, and this church continues to evangelize, to baptize, and preach the gospel today. When Christ arose, he intended us to keep his presence here on earth alive. Let's conclude today's video and discuss some of the characteristics of the risen Christ and what they mean for us.